tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
Tragic news out of Ontario. An Ontario Provincial Police officer killed in the line of duty. Constable Greg Pierre, just 28 years old, was killed by an alleged offender who was out on bail. And this is obviously quite a tragic case all around. But Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre pointed out that there is a political dimension to this. Now, the Commissioner of the Ontario Provincial Police, Thomas Carrick, has also called for changes. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has called on the federal government to get tougher on bail. The Liberal government actually went in the other direction on bail in 2019 with Bill C-75, which was called out by Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre at a press conference Friday morning. Pierre Poilievre joins me now. Pierre, Happy New Year. Thanks very much for joining me today.
Great to be with you, Andrew.
Obviously, and you spoke about this a little bit in a press conference Friday, very, very unfortunate and tragic circumstances out of Ontario. But what I found noteworthy is that you said there was a political dimension to this tragedy.
Unfortunately so. We all extend our hearts and prayers to the family and loved ones of Constable Greg Pierre. Incredible loss for such a young man, a young hero, and we stand with our officers across the constables, the men and women who wear the uniform across the country. But unfortunately, the federal government is failing them. The bail provisions in Justin Trudeau's catch and release law, C-75, allow violent repeat offenders who are newly charged with another offense to get out on bail almost automatically. The wording in the law is that the bail is supposed to be as easy to get and as lenient to follow as possible. And that means that judges are forced to release people who are likely to reoffend. And of course, that's what seems to have happened here. We have an alleged murderer who was out on bail. If he had not been on bail, then he would be behind bars and the constable would still be alive. So that's unfortunately how politics made its way into causing this tragedy.
Do you think it would be as simple as just repealing this law? Would that revert the bail system in Canada back to a place that you'd be happy with?
Well, I would repeal the parts that allow for automatic appeal or nearly automatic bail for repeat violent offenders. That's what we need to do. We need to make it clear that bail is for people who are unlikely to reoffend, whose offenses are minor and not repetitious, but not for repeat violent offenders. And that's very easy to inculcate in law. There's no reason to believe that the courts would reject it. We think we can bring in a court-proof law that will make it very hard for repeat offenders to get bail, and that would save lives of people right across this country.
Now, Bill C-75 also has a provision that calls on judges and justices of the peace to give particular consideration to Aboriginal accused. And in this particular case in Ontario, the alleged offender is Aboriginal. Do you think that is an appropriate caveat, or do you think there should be no special consideration based on one's racial identity?
Well, if we're going to take that into account, we have to take into account that the victims of these crimes are disproportionately vulnerable people. The victims of repeat offenders tend to be more likely to be minorities, Indigenous people, and others who are vulnerable. So if the system is supposed to be designed to protect vulnerable and historically wronged people, well, let's keep in mind the victims because they're the ones paying the price. I think it's outrageous that a First Nations mother has to worry that a repeat abuser is going to come back into the community and attack her and her kids again. So, let's take into account both the victims and the perpetrators, not just the latter. And that's what I think we just need to have a system that focuses on protecting public safety first, and the rights of the criminal should only come after that.
So do I take from that you don't believe there should be any consideration to the Aboriginal status of accused offenders?
Well, what I would say what I say is that the bail should be granted based on whether or not the judge finds that the accused is likely to reoffend, or of course to escape eventual prosecution by fleeing. And those should be the criteria that determine whether a judge grants bail. And what I was saying earlier is, obviously we want a just system for people who have historically been part of groups that have suffered in this country. But it is not just for the victims in those communities to live in fear because Trudeau's catch and release policies put criminals, violent reoffenders, back in the midst of innocent people. And that's what I want to reverse. If you're a repeat violent offender who's once again charged with a violent offense, then you should stay in prison until such time as you can be tried. And if you're convicted, you should serve out your sentence so that the people can be safe.
Several of the tough on crime justice reforms passed by Stephen Harper's government, in which you were obviously a part, have been overturned by the Supreme Court of Canada. So let me just ask you, as a matter of practicality, how do you put forward some of these reforms that you'd like to see when there is a court in Canada that has historically been quite hostile to some of these for whatever reason?
Well, you write laws that are constitutional and valid. And I think that, our purpose in the Harper era was to try and keep people safe. And by and large, we did that. Crime was a lot lower back then than it is now. Where the courts disagree, I think what we would do then is reintroduce the law with changes that met the constitutional bar that the court set, but at the same time, strive to protect the innocent against the perpetrator. That's not what the Trudeau government is doing. They introduced C-75, for example, even though the courts did not require it. There was no requirement by the court to bring in these catch and release policies. This was an obsession of the Liberal government and the Liberal ideology. So my view is that we can respect the constitutional rights of all Canadians while keeping violent reoffenders behind bars so that they can't harm the innocent.
So you don't think the courts are the problem here, then?
In this case, it's the Trudeau government that's the problem. Trudeau brought in C-75. No one forced him to do it. He passed it and he stood by it ever since. Trudeau has introduced laws to reduce sentences for violent gun offenses, and that too will make life more dangerous. And finally, put aside the criminal justice, the criminal code. The other thing he's doing is making life more dangerous by diverting police resources away from public safety towards persecuting trained and tested, vetted, and licensed law-abiding firearms owners. So you're going to have millions of dollars, and actually billions if you include the cost of buybacks, spent going after the people who are least likely to commit a crime. The duck hunter in Goose Bay, Happy Valley Goose Bay, rather than taking violent offenders off the street. And so that's actually going to make life more dangerous in Canada, in addition to harassing law-abiding Canadians and taking away their rights.
Yeah, and in the case in Ontario, someone who was prohibited from owning a firearm, yet somehow that didn't stop a firearms offense from taking place. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, thank you very much for your time.
Great to be with you, Andrew. Many blessings to you, and a happy New Year to you and your family.